Are you watching this at night? If you are, you might want to check the corners of your room. Make sure the shadows haven't shifted since you turned on this video. Out here in the Badlands, we learn early that not all darkness is created equal. Some shadows are just the absence of light, but others, well, others are something else entirely. I'm not telling you this to scare you, though if you're smart, you'll be a little scared. I'm telling you because what I've seen, what I've survived, isn't the kind of thing you'll find in park brochures or ranger training manuals. These are the stories that get whispered around campfires, the warnings that sound like superstition until you realize they're the only thing keeping you alive. My name is Evan, and I'm a park ranger in the Badlands. I've spent years patrolling these endless, broken landscapes, watching the sun set behind jagged ridges and feeling the temperature drop like a stone. I've seen tourists get lost, animals vanish, and storms roll in so fast you'd swear the sky was angry. But nothing prepared me for the night I learned the truth about the shadows here. There are rules in the Badlands, rules older than the park itself, and breaking them isn't just dangerous. It's deadly. If you think you know what's out there after dark, think again. Some things in the Badlands don't want to be seen, and if you do see them, you might not make it back to tell anyone. I never planned on coming back to the Badlands. After college, I swore I'd trade the endless wind and empty horizons for city lights and the steady hum of traffic. For a while, I did. I worked as a ranger in a sprawling urban park, where the biggest threats were off-leash dogs and the occasional lost child. It was safe, predictable, and I convinced myself that was enough. But when my father died last winter, alone in a trailer on the edge of the park he'd once patrolled, I found myself packing up my life and driving west, back to the place I'd spent my childhood trying to escape. The Badlands aren't like anywhere else. The land is a maze of eroded buttes and gullies. The soil a patchwork of reds and grays that seem to shift with every rain. The wind never stops, and the silence at night is so complete it presses against your ears. People here don't talk much, but when they do, it's with a kind of gravity that makes you listen. My father used to say the land remembers everything, every footstep, every secret, every mistake. I didn't believe him then. I'm not sure I do now, but I can't shake the feeling that something out here is always watching. I took the job at the park out of obligation, maybe guilt. My father's old friends welcomed me with nods and quiet words, but I could see the questions in their eyes. Was I here to run from something or to find something? Maybe both. The first week, I kept my head down, learning the trails, memorizing the radio codes, pretending the past didn't matter. But the Badlands have a way of pulling memories to the surface. Every time I passed the old ranger station, I thought of my father's stories, about the things he'd seen, the warnings he'd given. In the city, I'd learned to trust what I could see and measure. Out here, I was starting to realize that some things can't be explained, only respected. The rules are different in the Badlands, and I was about to learn just how different they could be. On my third day, I met Ranger Tomlinson, the oldest hand on staff and the closest thing the Badlands had to an oracle. He found me in the equipment shed, checking inventory, and handed me a battered notebook. "You'll want to read this," he said, his voice low and steady. "It's not in the official training, but it's more important than anything you'll find in the manual." Inside, the first page was titled Rules for Surviving the Badlands. Some were practical: never hike alone after sunset, always carry extra water, mark your trail with stones. But others felt like superstition. Don't follow shadows off the path. Never answer your name if you hear it called from the ravines. If you see a coyote with human eyes, turn back the way you came. I must have looked skeptical because Tomlinson just shook his head. You think it's all stories, don't you? That's what I thought too when I started. But every rule in there is written in blood. We lost a ranger last spring, good kid, sharp, but he broke the third rule. Followed by a shadow he thought was a lost hiker. We found his radio and his hat. That's all. He leaned against the doorframe, eyes fixed on the horizon. The land out here is old. Older than the park, older than the towns. People used to live here long before us and they left warnings. My grandfather called them the old rules. Said they were for keeping the balance, for making sure we didn't wander where we weren't wanted. I flipped through the notebook, feeling the weight of each line. Some rules were underlined, others marked with dates and names. You don't have to believe, Tomlinson said quietly, but you do have to follow. The Badlands don't care if you're a skeptic. They just care if you're careful. He paused at the door, his silhouette framed by the fading light. Remember, Evan, out here, the shadows aren't always empty. And if you break the rules, you might not get a second chance. The notebook felt heavy in my hands. A silent promise that the stories I dismissed might be the only thing standing between me and whatever waited in the dark. My first night patrol was supposed to be routine. The sky was clear, the moon a thin sliver above the jagged skyline, and the radio was quiet except for the occasional check-in from the east lookout. I told myself I was ready, that the rules in Tomlinson's notebook were just a local flavor of caution, nothing more. I set out on the North Trail, boots crunching over dry earth, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The Badlands at night are a different world. Shadows stretch and twist, the wind whistles through the gullies, and every sound seems amplified by the emptiness. Halfway through my loop, I stopped to check a trail marker. That's when I noticed it. A set of tracks in the dust, fresh and sharp, leading off the path and into a narrow ravine. They looked like coyote prints, but larger, deeper, and spaced too far apart for any animal I'd ever seen. I knelt down, running my fingers over the impressions, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. The air felt colder here, the silence heavier. I remembered the rule, don't follow shadows off the path. But curiosity got the better of me. I stepped off the trail, following the tracks as they wound between boulders and low scrub. The further I went, the more the landscape seemed to close in, the moonlight barely reaching the ground. My flashlight flickered, then steadied, casting long, jittery shadows against the rocks. That's when I heard it. A voice, faint and distant, calling my name. Evan. It sounded like my father, the way he used to call me in for dinner when I was a kid. My heart hammered in my chest. I knew it couldn't be him, but the voice was so familiar, so real. I took another step, and the wind picked up, carrying the voice away. The tracks ended abruptly at a patch of bare stone, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. Suddenly, a shadow moved at the edge of my light, too tall, too thin, gliding across the ground without a sound. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run. The shadow paused, then seemed to stretch toward me, its edges flickering like smoke. My breath caught in my throat. I remembered Tomlinson's warning. The shadows aren't always empty. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. The shadow recoiled, melting into the rocks as if it had never been there. I scrambled back to the trail, heart pounding, sweat cold on my skin despite the chill. When I finally reached the main path, I forced myself to look back. The ravine was empty, silent, the tracks already fading in the shifting dust. Back at the station, I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was a trick of the moonlight or the wind playing games with my memory. But when I checked my phone, I saw a missed call. No number, just a blank screen. The time matched the moment I'd heard my name in the ravine. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to sound crazy, and I still wasn't ready to believe. But that night, as I lay in my bunk, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me back. The shadows in my room seemed to move just a little too much, and every time the wind rattled the window, I heard my name whispered on the edge of sleep. I told myself it was just nerves, just the Badlands getting under my skin. But deep down, I knew better. The rules weren't just folklore. They were warnings, and I'd already come too close to breaking them. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unease from the night before, but it clung to me like a second skin. I arrived at the ranger station early, hoping routine paperwork would clear my head. Instead, I found Tomlinson waiting by the radio, his face drawn and serious. "We've got a call," he said. "A camper's gone missing near Devil's Backbone. You're with me." Devil's Backbone was a jagged ridge notorious for sudden drop-offs and twisted rock formations. Locals avoided it, and even the most seasoned hikers treated it with respect. As we drove out, Tomlinson filled me in. "Guy's name is Mark Jensen, a solo hiker, checked in yesterday, never came back to his site. His friends found his gear but no sign of him. They said he was looking for the old petroglyphs." We parked at the trailhead, the sun already high and the air shimmering with heat. The missing man's tent was still pitched, a half-eaten meal on the camp stove. His backpack sat by the fire ring, untouched. Tomlinson knelt to examine the ground. No signs of a struggle, no blood, just gone. We started up the ridge, following a faint trail. The landscape was harsh, the rocks sharp and the wind relentless. After half a mile, we found the first sign. A set of footprints leading away from the trail, deeper into the maze of stone. They were Jensen's boots, but after a few yards, the prints changed, elongated, the stride impossibly long, the impressions deeper than any human could make. Tomlinson's jaw tightened. "You see that?" I nodded, my mouth dry. "That's not normal. Not even close." We pressed on, the silence broken only by the crunch of gravel underfoot. The trail led us to a narrow canyon, its walls etched with ancient carvings, spirals, animal shapes, and figures with outstretched arms. I traced one with my finger, feeling the groove worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. "My grandfather used to say these were warnings," Tomlinson murmured. "Messages from the people who lived here before. They knew things we've forgotten." As we moved deeper into the canyon, the air grew colder, the light dimmer. I felt eyes on me, though I saw nothing but stone and shadow. Then, at the far end, we found Jensen's hat, perched on a rock as if placed there deliberately. Next to it, a circle of stones, each marked with a smear of ash. In the center, a small pile of animal bones, picked clean, arranged in a spiral. Tomlinson crouched, studying the scene. "This isn't the first time," he said quietly. We've found sites like this before, always after someone goes missing. Always the same pattern: stones, ash, bones. The elders say it's a calling, a way to invite something in. I shivered, remembering the shadow in the ravine, the voice that called my name. What do you think happened to him? I asked. Tomlinson shook his head. I don't know, but I do know we're not alone out here. The land remembers, and sometimes it takes back what it's owed. We radioed for backup, but the signal was weak, the static thick. As we waited, I wandered to the edge of the canyon, scanning the horizon. That's when I saw it, a figure standing on a distant ridge, too far to make out details, but unmistakably watching us. I blinked, and it was gone. When the rest of the team arrived, we swept the area, but found nothing more. No tracks, no sign of Jensen, just the circle of stones and the uneasy feeling that we were being watched. The official report would say, missing, presumed lost, but everyone at the station knew better. The Badlands had claimed another. That night, word spread through the small community. At the diner, old-timers swapped stories about disappearances, about the long shadows that moved on their own, about the rules their parents had drilled into them. Don't whistle after dark, one woman said, her voice trembling. Don't look back if you hear footsteps behind you, and never, ever follow a shadow off the trail. I listened, the weight of their words settling on my shoulders. These weren't just stories, they were survival strategies, passed down through generations. The more I heard, the more I realized how little I understood about the place I now called home. Back at the station, Tomlinson handed me a mug of coffee. You're starting to see it, aren't you? He asked. The patterns, the warnings. I nodded, staring into the dark liquid. It's like the deeper we dig, the more dangerous it gets. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. That's the Badlands for you. Curiosity is a luxury out here. Sometimes the land answers back. I lay awake that night, the wind rattling the windows, the shadows in my room shifting with every gust. I thought of Jensen, of the stones and bones, of the figure on the ridge. I wondered how many others had vanished, their stories swallowed by the silence. The rules were starting to make sense, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already in too deep, and that the Badlands were just getting started. The days after Jensen's disappearance blurred together, each one heavier than the last. I tried to bury myself in routine, trail maintenance, visitor logs, radio checks, but the sense of being watched never left me. At night, sleep became a battleground. I'd close my eyes and find myself back in the canyon, the spiral of bones at my feet, the wind whispering my name in a voice that was almost, but not quite, my father's. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my cabin. At first, I thought it was Tomlinson making his rounds, but the steps were too light, too deliberate. I reached for my flashlight and crept to the window. The moon cast long shadows across the yard, and for a moment, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, tall, thin, its face lost in darkness. It didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. My breath fogged the glass as I stared back, heart pounding. When I blinked, the figure was gone, but the feeling of dread lingered. The next morning, I found strange marks in the dirt outside my door, elongated prints, half human, half animal, circling the cabin. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a coyote, maybe a prank. But deep down, I knew better. The rules echoed in my mind. Don't answer your name if you hear it called from the ravines. Don't follow shadows off the path. I'd already broken one. Was this my warning? That evening, I called my sister just to hear a familiar voice. She answered on the second ring, her laughter bright and grounding. We talked about nothing, her kids, the weather, old memories of our father. As we said goodbye, her tone shifted. Be careful out there, Evan. Dad always said the Badlands had a way of getting under your skin. After we hung up, I sat in silence, the phone heavy in my hand. I realized how alone I was, how far I drifted from the world I understood. My training, first aid, search and rescue, crisis management, felt useless against something that left no evidence, no logic, only fear. That night, the dreams returned. I wandered the Badlands, lost and desperate, the landscape shifting with every step. Shadows slithered at the edge of my vision, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I heard my sister's voice, faint and frightened, calling for help. I ran toward her, but the ground crumbled beneath my feet, and I fell into darkness. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, the taste of dust in my mouth. The shadows in my room seemed to pulse, alive and watching. I remembered Tomlinson's words. The land remembers. The old rules keep you safe. I reached for the notebook, flipping through its pages until I found a line I'd missed before. If the shadows follow you home, seek help from those who remember the old ways. Rationality had failed me. The Badlands were playing by different rules, and if I wanted to survive, I'd have to learn them fast. The next morning, I drove into town, the notebook clutched tight in my hand. I stopped at the trading post, where Tomlinson was talking with an older woman I'd seen around but never met. Her name was Mrs. Red Elk, and when I explained what had been happening, the dreams, the footprints, the figure in the trees, she listened without interruption, her eyes sharp and knowing. "You're not the first to come asking," she said quietly. "The land here is old, and it remembers. Sometimes it calls out to those who don't listen or those who forget the rules." She motioned for me to follow her behind the store, where a small circle of stones marked a patch of bare earth. "Sit," she instructed. "We'll do what we can." Tomlinson joined us, his face gravely. Mrs. Red Elk began to chant in a language I didn't understand, sprinkling cornmeal in a circle around us. The air felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. She burned sage, the smoke curling in the wind, and pressed a small pouch of herbs into my palm. "For protection," she said. "Keep it with you always." As the ceremony continued, I felt a strange clarity settle over me. The shadows in my mind receded, replaced by a sense of connection to the land, to the people who had walked it before me, to the rules that had kept them safe. Mrs. Red Elk's voice rose and fell, weaving stories of the old ones, the spirits that moved in the Badlands, the bargains struck to keep the peace. "The shadows you saw are not just darkness," she told me. "They are memories, hungry for attention. If you respect them, they may leave you be. If you challenge them, they will test you." When the ceremony ended, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. Tomlinson clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good, kid. Not everyone's willing to ask for help. That's how you survive out here, by listening, by learning, by blending what you know with what you're willing to believe." Driving back to the station, I tucked the pouch into my jacket and glanced at the horizon. The Badlands looked the same, but I knew something had shifted. I was no longer just a ranger with a badge and a rule book. I was part of something older, something that demanded respect and humility. The old ways weren't just stories, they were survival. And I was finally ready to listen. The days grew shorter, the air colder, and the sense of unease in the park deepened. Reports of strange sightings trickled in, campers hearing voices at night, hikers glimpsing figures at the edge of their vision, animals refusing to enter certain ravines. The notebook's rules felt less like folklore and more like a lifeline. I kept Mrs. Red Elk's pouch with me at all times, and every night I checked the shadows in my cabin before turning out the light. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, a call came over the radio. A group of hikers was overdue near Devil's Backbone, the same place where Mark Jensen had vanished. Tomlinson and I exchanged a look. "We go together," he said, voice steady, "and we follow the rules." We set out with flashlights, extra batteries, and the old protocols echoing in my mind. The wind howled through the canyons, carrying with it the distant sound of something moving, too heavy for a deer, too quiet for a person. As we reached the ridge, the last light faded, and the world turned to shadow. We found the hikers huddled near a rock outcrop, pale and shaken. "Something was following us," one whispered. "We heard it calling our names." I remembered the rule: never answer a voice from the ravines. "Did you answer?" I asked. They shook their heads, but fear lingered in their eyes. As we led them back toward the trailhead, the air grew colder, the darkness pressing in. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I saw a shape moving between the rocks, tall, thin, its outline shifting like smoke. I felt the old fear rise, but I gripped the pouch in my pocket and remembered Mrs. Red Elk's words. Respect, not challenge. The path twisted, and suddenly Tomlinson stopped. "We're not alone," he murmured. The shadows seemed to thicken, and a low, whispering sound filled the air. I could feel something watching, waiting. My rational mind screamed for an explanation, but instinct told me to act. I knelt, drawing a circle in the dirt with a piece of sage, just as I'd seen in the ceremony. I sprinkled cornmeal, my hands shaking, and began to speak softly, words of respect, of apology, of acknowledgement for the old ones and the land. The wind shifted, carrying my voice into the darkness. The shadows paused, swirling at the edge of the circle. The hikers clung to each other, Tomlinson standing guard. I kept speaking, my voice growing steadier with each word. "We mean no harm. We honor the rules. We ask for safe passage." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the oppressive weight in the air lifted. The shadows receded, melting back into the rocks. The wind calmed, and the night grew still. We guided the hikers back to the trailhead, the sense of danger fading with every step. When we reached the safety of the ranger truck, Tomlinson let out a long breath. "You did good," he said quietly. "You listened. You learned." But as we drove away, I glanced back at the ridge. For just a second, I thought I saw a figure standing in the moonlight, watching us go. The Badlands had let us leave, but I knew the rules would always be waiting, and that not everyone who wandered into the shadows would be so lucky. The outcome was uncertain, and the land kept its secrets. But I'd faced the darkness and found a way through, not by fighting, but by respecting what I could not understand. And in the Badlands, sometimes that's the only way to survive. The days after the confrontation passed in a strange, quiet haze. The missing hikers recovered quickly, though none of them could clearly remember what had happened in the darkness. Their stories were fragments, shadows moving, voices calling, a sense of being watched by something that didn't want to be seen. Officially, the report listed disorientation and exposure as the cause, but everyone at the station knew there was more to it. The Badlands had let them go, but not without a warning. Tomlinson and I spent hours walking the trails, checking for signs that the balance had shifted. The spiral of bones at Devil's Backbone was gone. The stones scattered, the ash washed away by a sudden rain. It felt like the land itself was erasing the evidence, closing the chapter but not the book. I found myself looking at the world differently. Every shadow, every gust of wind, every silence between the rocks seemed to carry a message. I understood now why the old rules mattered, why the stories were told and retold. There was a cost, though. I felt older, as if I'd left a part of myself in that canyon. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, my dreams were filled with the faces of those who hadn't made it back. Jensen, my father, the names in Tomlinson's notebook. I realized that justice here wasn't about catching a culprit or closing a case. It was about restoring balance, about respecting the boundaries between what belonged to us and what belonged to the land. Mrs. Red Elk visited the station one afternoon, bringing a loaf of fry bread and a quiet smile. She sat with me on the porch, watching the sun set over the ridges. "You did what you had to do," she said. "You listened. You learned. That's all the land asks." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle in my bones. I'd come to the Badlands looking for answers, for a way to make sense of my father's warnings and my own fears. What I found was something deeper, a sense of belonging, a respect for the mysteries that would never be solved, a willingness to walk the line between the known and the unknown. The world felt safer, but I knew the supernatural was never fully gone. The rules were still there, etched into the land and whispered in the wind. I carried them with me not as burdens, but as guides. The Badlands had changed me, and I was grateful for it. I was no longer just a ranger. I was a keeper of stories, a guardian of boundaries, a believer in the power of respect and balance. As the last light faded and the shadows stretched across the earth, I promised myself I would never forget what I'd learned. The Badlands would always hold their secrets, but I was ready to face whatever came next, with open eyes, a steady heart, and the old rules close at hand. Word spread quietly through the park and the nearby town. Some called me the ranger who finally listened. Others just nodded with a new kind of respect. Tomlinson started calling me the Bridge, half joking, half serious, and Mrs. Red Elk pressed another pouch of herbs into my hand. "For the next time," she said, as if she already knew there would be one. I settled into my new role, balancing paperwork and patrols with the quiet responsibility of watching for signs others might miss. Sometimes visitors would find me at dusk, asking about the old rules, wanting to know if the stories were true. I'd tell them what I could, careful to leave space for their own discoveries. The Badlands had taught me that some lessons can't be given, only earned. But the land never truly rests. There are still places where the wind sounds like voices, where the shadows move just a little too quickly, where the old warnings feel urgent and alive. I've started keeping my own notebook, adding new rules as I learn them, knowing that the mysteries here are far from finished. If you ever find yourself in the Badlands, remember, not all dangers are marked on the map, and not every shadow is empty. There are still rules we haven't learned, and things waiting in the dark for someone to forget them. Maybe one day, I'll tell you about the night the river ran backward, or the footprints that started at my door and vanished into thin air. Until then, keep your eyes open, trust the old ways, and if you have a story of your own, I'm listening. The Badlands are always listening, too.